July 9, 2006, the 110th minute of the World Cup final, the greatest player of his generation was about to commit the most infamous act in football history in front of 1 billion people watching worldwide. Zinedine Zidane, calm, elegant, untouchable, would lower his head and drive it into Marco Materazzi's chest with such force that the Italian defender would crumple to the ground like a demolished building. This wasn't just a moment of madness. This was the explosion of a man who had carried the weight of a nation, the burden of expectations, and the pain of a family under attack. For years, we thought we knew what happened. We thought we knew what was said. But the truth is far more complex, far more human, and far more heartbreaking than anyone imagined. This is the story of how 10 words destroyed a fairy tale ending. This is the story of pride, family, and the thin line between glory and disgrace. This is the full story of why Zinedine Zidane headbutted Marco Materazzi. To understand what happened in Berlin, we have to go back to where it all began. Marseille, France. The housing projects of La Castellane. This wasn't the glamorous south of France you see in travel magazines. This was the forgotten France, the immigrant France. The place where Zinedine Zidane was born on June 23, 1972, to Algerian parents who had fled their homeland searching for something better. His father, Smail, worked as a warehouseman and a nighttime security guard. His mother, Malika, cleaned houses for wealthy families in the affluent parts of Marseille. The Zidanes lived in a tiny apartment, 5 children crammed into 3 rooms. They had nothing, but they had everything that mattered: dignity, respect, and an unbreakable family bond. Young Zinedine didn't speak much. He was shy, withdrawn, always the quiet one. But give him a football, and suddenly the world made sense. On those concrete courts, between those housing blocks, a genius was being born. Not just a footballer, an artist, a poet in boots. Every touch of the ball was deliberate. Every movement had purpose. Even as a child, Zidane didn't play football. He conducted it like a symphony. But life in La Castellane was hard. Zidane grew up watching his parents sacrifice everything. He watched his mother come home exhausted, her hands raw from scrubbing other people's floors. He watched his father work double shifts just to put food on the table. And he learned something fundamental that would shape the rest of his life. Family is everything. Respect is everything. And if anyone disrespects your family, there are consequences. Zidane's talent couldn't be contained in those projects forever. At 14, he was spotted by a scout from Cannes. By 17, he was playing professional football. At 24, he joined Juventus and became one of the best midfielders in the world. At 29, Real Madrid paid a world record fee to bring him to the Bernabeu. But what made Zidane different wasn't just his skill, it was his temperament. On the pitch, he was ice, unshakable. While other players would lose their heads, Zidane remained calm. He glided across the field like a ghost, always one step ahead, always in control. Coaches loved him, teammates revered him, opponents feared him. Off the pitch, he was humble, soft-spoken. He never forgot where he came from. Never forgot those concrete courts in Marseille. Never forgot his parents' sacrifices. When reporters asked about his success, he didn't talk about himself. He talked about his family. Always his family. But there was something else about Zidane that most people didn't see. Beneath that calm exterior was a fierce protector. If you disrespected him, he could handle it. But if you disrespected his family, his heritage, his people, that was crossing a line. And Zidane had a history of protecting that line with violence. In 2000, playing for Juventus, he stamped on a Hamburg player during a Champions League match. Suspension. In 2001, playing for Real Madrid, he headbutted a Hamburg player, again, after an exchange of words. Another suspension. The pattern was clear: push Zidane too far, especially with words about his family or his Algerian roots, and the elegant genius would become something else entirely. Something dangerous. By 2006, Zidane had retired from international football. At 33 years old, he was done. He'd won the World Cup in 1998. He'd won the European Championship in 2000. He'd won everything there was to win. His body was tired. His mind was tired. It was time to rest. But France needed him. After winning the World Cup in 1998, Les Bleus had become a disaster. They crashed out of the 2002 World Cup without scoring a single goal. They were embarrassing at Euro 2004. The golden generation was crumbling. And so, France's coach Raymond Domenech made a desperate phone call. "Zinedine, we need you. One more time, one last dance." Zidane said yes. Not for glory, not for money. For France, for his teammates, for his family watching back in Marseille. This would be his farewell tour. His final gift to the country that had given his immigrant family a home. The fairy tale ending was written in the stars. The greatest player of his generation would lift the World Cup one more time and ride off into the sunset as a legend. And for most of the tournament, that's exactly what happened. France struggled in the group stage, but Zidane was magnificent. Against Spain, he orchestrated a masterpiece. Against Brazil, the defending champions, he was untouchable, leading France to a 1-0 victory. Against Portugal in the semi-finals, he converted a penalty with the calmness of a man who had done this 1,000 times. France was in the World Cup final, and Zidane, in his final match, would face Italy. One last battle, one last chance at immortality. Marco Materazzi was everything Zidane was not. Where Zidane was elegant, Materazzi was brutal. Where Zidane was poetry, Materazzi was war. The Italian defender had built his career on intimidation, on physical dominance, on getting inside opponents' heads. He wasn't just tough, he was cruel. He knew exactly what to say, exactly how to push buttons, exactly where it hurt most. Materazzi grew up in Lecce, Italy, the son of a football coach. He learned the game from the old school. Kick first. Apologize never. By 2006, at 32 years old, he was one of Italy's most important defenders. Not because he was the most talented, he wasn't, but because he was willing to do the dirty work, the cynical fouls, the psychological warfare, the dark arts that referees couldn't always see. In Italian football, they have a term, cattiveria. It means wickedness, nastiness, the willingness to be the villain if it helps your team win. Materazzi embodied cattiveria. He would pull shirts, hold players in the box, elbow them when the referee wasn't looking. And he would talk. Oh, would he talk? A constant stream of insults, provocations, anything to make you lose focus. But here's what most people don't understand. Materazzi wasn't a monster. He was a professional. This was his job. Football at the highest level isn't just about skill. It's about psychology. It's about finding your opponent's weakness and exploiting it without mercy. And Materazzi was a master at this particular craft. He also wasn't afraid of anyone, not even Zinedine Zidane. In fact, facing a legend like Zidane in a World Cup final, that was the ultimate test. Could he get under the great man's skin? Could he make the elegant genius lose his composure? For Materazzi, this wasn't personal. This was war. And in war, you use every weapon available. What he didn't know was that Zidane's family had been under attack for weeks. What he didn't know was that he was about to light a fuse that had been burning since the tournament began. July 9, 2006, 8 p.m. The World Cup final kicked off under the Berlin lights. 115 years of World Cup history had led to this moment. France versus Italy. Experience versus discipline. Artistry versus steel. And in the 7th minute, Zidane made his mark. France won a penalty. Zidane stepped up, calm, assured, unstoppable. He dinked the ball down the center with outrageous confidence, the goalkeeper diving left, the ball floating into the net off the crossbar. It was audacious. It was perfect. It was Zidane. 1-0 to France. The fairy tale was going according to script. But 12 minutes later, Materazzi equalized. A header from a corner, 1-1. And suddenly, the match transformed. Italy grew stronger. France looked tired. Zidane was still brilliant in flashes, but he was 33 years old playing in his final match. His legs were heavy. His lungs were burning. The match went to extra time. 30 more minutes. 2 exhausted teams. 2 nations desperate for glory. And in the 105th minute, Zidane had a chance to win it. A header that went just wide of the Italian goal. So close to immortality. So close to the perfect ending. And then it happened. The moment that would define his legacy forever. The TV cameras didn't catch it at first. But in the 110th minute, as play moved up the field, Zidane and Materazzi found themselves side by side, and Materazzi started talking. Now, here's what we know happened in the moments before the headbutt, pieced together from lip readers, from Materazzi's own later confession, and from Zidane's explanation. As they jogged together, Materazzi grabbed Zidane's jersey. It was a typical defender's tactic, nothing unusual. Zidane, irritated, responded, "If you want my shirt so badly, I'll give it to you after the match." It was a nothing comment. Slightly cocky maybe, but nothing inflammatory. But to Materazzi, it was an opening, an opportunity, and what he said next crossed every line imaginable. According to multiple sources and Materazzi's own admission, he responded, "I'd prefer your sister," but he didn't stop there. He added words that were even more vile, more personal. He attacked Zidane's sister using language that was deliberately crude and sexual. And in that moment, something inside Zinedine Zidane, the calm, the control, the ice, shattered completely. But to understand why those words destroyed Zidane, you need to understand what his family meant to him. And you need to understand what his family had been dealing with during the World Cup. Zidane's sister Lila was seriously ill. She had been unwell for months, and during the World Cup, her condition had deteriorated. Zidane knew this. Every match he played, he was thinking about her. Every interview he gave, reporters asked about her health. The worry was consuming him, but there was more. In the lead-up to the final, there had been racist rhetoric in French media about the national team. France's squad was diverse. Players of North African and African heritage made up much of the team. Some commentators, some politicians, some fans questioned whether these players were truly French. They questioned their loyalty, their commitment, their identity. For Zidane, this wasn't just offensive, it was personal. He had spent his entire life proving that he belonged, that an Algerian kid from the projects could represent France with pride and honor, that his family's sacrifice meant something. And now, in his final days as a player, people were questioning everything he'd fought for. His mother, Malika, had seen the comments. She had heard the whispers. And it broke Zidane's heart to know that his mother, this woman who had cleaned houses her entire life so her children could have opportunities, was being disrespected because of her heritage. So when Materazzi attacked his sister, it wasn't just an insult. It was an attack on everything Zidane held sacred: his family, his heritage, his mother's dignity, his sister's suffering. In that moment, on the biggest stage in world football, with 1 billion people watching, Zinedine Zidane wasn't a footballer anymore. He was a son, a brother, a man whose family had been violated, and he responded the only way he knew how. Zidane stopped walking. He turned around. And with Materazzi still talking, still not understanding what he had triggered, Zidane lowered his head and charged. The impact was brutal. Materazzi's chest took the full force of Zidane's skull, and the Italian crumpled to the ground like he'd been shot. Players rushed in, the referee came running, and slowly, sickeningly, the red card came out. Zinedine Zidane, 3-time FIFA World Player of the Year, World Cup winner, European champion, Real Madrid legend, was sent off in his final professional match. For a headbutt in a World Cup final, the stadium was silent. The French players were in shock. The Italian players were claiming innocence. What did we do? We said nothing. Even though everyone knew better. And Zidane, his face still set in stone, walked toward the tunnel, past the World Cup trophy gleaming on its pedestal, past his teammates who would now have to finish the match without him, past his dream of the perfect ending. In the tunnel, away from the cameras, Zidane broke down. He sat with his head in his hands, realizing what he had done, not just to himself, but to his team, to his country, to his legacy. On the field, France held on for the rest of extra time. The match went to penalties, and without Zidane, France's best penalty taker, their leader, their talisman, they lost. David Trezeguet's penalty hit the crossbar. Italy won 5-3 on penalties. Italy were world champions, and Zinedine Zidane's career ended in disgrace. The media went insane. The headbutt became the most replayed moment in sports history. Billions of people watched it, analyzed it, debated it. Was Zidane a hero for defending his family? Was he a villain for abandoning his team? Was he justified? Was he unforgivable? FIFA opened an investigation. Materazzi was called to testify. And finally, he admitted it. Yes, he had said something. Yes, it was about Zidane's sister. But he claimed it wasn't that bad. Just normal trash talk. The kind of thing players say to each other all the time. The excuse was pathetic. But FIFA accepted it. Materazzi received a 2-match ban and a fine. Zidane received a 3-match ban, meaningless since he was already retired, and a larger fine. And that was it. Case closed. Zidane himself spoke about it days later. He was calm again, the ice restored. He said, "I apologize, but I'm also a man. I'd rather have taken a punch in the face than hear those words about my sister and my mother." He didn't regret defending his family. He regretted letting them down by getting sent off. He regretted that his career would forever be defined by that one moment of madness rather than 2 decades of brilliance. But here's the thing. Despite everything, despite the red card and the lost final, FIFA still named Zinedine Zidane the best player of the tournament. He won the Golden Ball. Even in disgrace, even after a headbutt seen around the world, the football community recognized his greatness. They recognized that one moment of human weakness didn't erase a lifetime of genius. The world was divided. In Italy, Materazzi became a hero, the man who got inside Zidane's head and helped Italy win the World Cup. In France, opinion was split. Some called Zidane a disgrace. Others called him a hero for standing up to racism and defending his family's honor. In the immigrant communities of France, the housing projects, the forgotten neighborhoods where Zidane came from, people understood. They knew what it meant to be disrespected because of your heritage. They knew what it meant to watch your family be attacked with words designed to humiliate. And they stood by Zidane. Murals appeared in Marseille showing the headbutt as a moment of resistance, not shame. The incident sparked a wider conversation about racism in football, about what players have to endure from opponents, about the line between competitive trash talk and personal attacks, about the pressure on players of color to be perfect while white players are allowed to be passionate. Sports psychologists analyzed it. Was Zidane a victim of psychological manipulation? Should Materazzi face harsher punishment? Should verbal abuse be treated as seriously as physical violence? But underneath all the debate, all the analysis, all the controversy, there was a simple truth. Zinedine Zidane was human. For 20 years, he had been a god on the football pitch, untouchable, unbreakable, perfect. And in his final 90 minutes, he reminded us that even gods can fall, that even the most disciplined man has a breaking point, that family, honor, and dignity matter more than trophies. Years later, Materazzi would speak about the incident with a mix of defiance and pragmatism. He admitted what he said, more or less. He admitted it was harsh. But he never really apologized. In fact, he seemed almost proud of it. "It was a World Cup final," he said in interviews. "You do what you have to do to win. I got under his skin. I did my job." And in a twisted way, he was right. From a purely tactical perspective, goading Zidane into a red card was genius. It removed France's best player, their leader, their clutch performer for penalties. It directly contributed to Italy winning the World Cup. But at what cost? Materazzi had to live with being known as the man who provoked the headbutt. His legacy is forever tied to that moment. When people remember him, if they remember him, they remember the man who insulted Zidane's family. The man who collapsed theatrically to ensure a red card. The villain in someone else's tragedy. He won a World Cup, but he lost something else. Respect. Dignity. The ability to be remembered for his footballing ability rather than his psychological warfare. Meanwhile, Zidane, despite the red card, despite the lost final, despite the disgrace, remains beloved, a legend, an icon. Because people understood. They understood that what he did was wrong, but they also understood why he did it. They understood that some things are more important than football, that family is more important than a medal, that there are lines you don't cross, words you don't say, insults you don't make. But here's the beautiful thing about Zidane's story. It didn't end in Berlin. After retirement, he became a coach, and not just any coach. He became one of the greatest managers of his generation. He led Real Madrid to 3 consecutive Champions League titles, something that had never been done in the modern era. He won La Liga. He won everything. And he did it with grace, with calmness, with the same ice-cold temperament that had defined his playing career. The headbutt became a footnote in his story rather than the entire book. People remembered his volley in the 2002 Champions League final. They remembered his performance at the 1998 World Cup. They remembered 20 years of genius. The 2006 incident became a humanizing moment rather than a defining one. It showed that even legends have breaking points, that even the calmest man can explode when his family is attacked. And in some ways, it made people love him more. Because he wasn't perfect, he was real. Zidane never publicly forgave Materazzi, but he moved on. He built a new legacy. He proved that one moment of madness doesn't define a lifetime of excellence. And he remained true to the values his parents taught him in that tiny apartment in La Castellane. Family first, respect always, dignity non-negotiable. The Zidane Materazzi incident forced football to confront uncomfortable truths. For decades, players of color had endured racist abuse. From opponents, from fans, from the media. They were expected to just take it, to be professional, to turn the other cheek, to prove they were civilized enough to deserve their place in European football. Zidane's headbutt said, "Enough." It said that there are limits to what a man should endure, that some insults are designed not just to gain a competitive advantage, but to dehumanize. To remind you that no matter how successful you are, no matter how many trophies you win, some people will always see you as less than. After 2006, conversations began to change. Football authorities started taking verbal abuse more seriously. Campaigns against racism intensified. Players felt more empowered to call out discrimination. The old code of silence began to crack. Was Zidane's headbutt the right response? No. Violence is never the answer. He knows that. We all know that. But was it understandable? Was it human? Was it the breaking point of a man who had carried the weight of his community's expectations for his entire career? Yes. Absolutely yes. And that's the complexity of Zinedine Zidane. He is not a saint. He is not a villain. He is a man. A son of immigrants who became the greatest footballer of his generation. A quiet genius who spoke through his feet rather than his mouth. A fiercely proud individual who would sacrifice everything, even his legacy, to defend his family's honor. On July 9, 2006, the world watched Zinedine Zidane commit an act of violence that would define the final chapter of his playing career. But they didn't see the full picture. They didn't see the weeks of worry about his sick sister. They didn't see the racist rhetoric his family had endured. They didn't see the lifetime of code switching, of proving himself, of being the good immigrant who had to be better than everyone else, just to be considered equal. They didn't see Marco Materazzi calculating exactly which words would destroy a man's composure. They didn't hear the vile insult about Zidane's sister. They didn't understand that in that moment, Zidane made a choice. He could walk away and potentially win the World Cup while swallowing an unforgivable insult to his family. Or he could defend his honor and lose everything. He chose honor. He chose family. He chose to be human rather than perfect. And maybe that's the real lesson of the headbutt that shocked the world. That we are all human. That we all have breaking points. That defending the people we love sometimes costs us everything we've worked for. And that, in the end, the measure of a man isn't whether he never falls, it's how he rises after falling. Zinedine Zidane rose. He became a legendary manager. He remained devoted to his family. He never apologized for defending them, even though he regretted how it affected his team. And today, when people talk about the greatest footballers in history, his name is always there. Not despite the headbutt. Not because of the headbutt. But because 20 years of genius cannot be erased by one moment of rage. The boy from La Castellane became a legend. The legend became human. The human became eternal. And somewhere in Marseille, in a tiny apartment where it all began, Zidane's mother still watches footage of her son, not the headbutt, but the goals, the assists, the moments of magic that made the world stop and watch in awe. And she smiles. Because she knows the truth that the world sometimes forgets. Her son was never just a footballer. He was a guardian, a protector, a man who knew that some things are more important than trophies. He was, and always will be, Zizou. And his legacy is not defined by 10 seconds of fury. but by a lifetime of grace, punctuated by one moment when grace wasn't enough, when humanity demanded more, and when a man chose family over glory. That's not a tragedy. That's love. And that's why we'll never forget what happened in Berlin. Not because of the violence, but because of what it revealed. That even our heroes are human. That family is sacred. That words can wound deeper than any blade. And that sometimes, defending what you love costs you everything. And it's still worth it. The headbutt that shocked the world wasn't just about football. It was about honor, heritage, and the impossible burden we place on those we elevate to greatness. It was about a man who spent his entire life being perfect, and one moment when perfection wasn't possible anymore. It was about Zinedine Zidane choosing to be a man rather than a myth.